Yes, we are live.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As a preliminary matter, this is Denise Cronow, the Chair of FinCom. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. George Harrington? George, you have to unmute. There we go. Try again.
I said I'm here now.
Thank you. Chris Glowacki?
Here.
Peter McKeehan?
Here and present.
Jill Veith?
Here.
Joe Grouse?
Present.
Stephen Morey?
Aye.
Peter Schaefer? Peter, you have to unmute. You can hit the space bar to do that.
I thought I had done that. Okay.
There you
all
go.
right.
Thank you. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Ally,
Here.
Brian,
Present.
and Libby.
Present.
Thank you. We have no anticipated speakers on the agenda, so I'll go right into reading the script for the remotely conducted open meetings. Good afternoon. This open meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting of the Finance Committee of the Town of Nantucket is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Meeting materials. All supporting materials have been provided. Members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Meeting business ground rules. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude the remarks, I will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment. Your name is called. Further, remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until I yield the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through me, taking care to identify yourself. For the items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. Staff Ally will activate the chat feature on YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use this feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions are on the town's website. The chair and/or staff will do their best to address questions and comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Okay, there we go. So now over to the agenda. So as we already said, we have call to order. The Finance Committee is being audio and video recorded. May I get a approval of the agenda? I will call on someone. Someone raise your hand to, thank you, Joe.
Joe Grouse, I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Agenda is approved. Oh, all in favor, please say aye. Oh, we have to do it one by one.
Aye.
Sorry, I've got to call you. George,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Stephen,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Peter, Schaefer. You have to unmute, Peter.
Aye.
Denise, I. Select Board has it easier. There's only 5. Watching the Select Board every night.
I don't
Okay.
think they have it easier around now.
Well, no, that's true. But I mean, in terms of roll call, there are a few shorter. Okay. Now, now's open for public comment. So Ally, I will open the floor or open the meeting to public comment. Do we have any questions coming in via YouTube?
Nope.
Ah, what a surprise. Okay, I will now close the public comment. At this point, I will be turning it, so our next agenda item is review of the fiscal year 2020 current general fund and enterprise fund budgets with respect to COVID-19 pandemic costs and impacts. And Brian, with that, I will turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we've been very vigorously looking at fiscal 20. We're trying to work on finalizing where we think everything will end up for fiscal 20. The general fund, as of the third quarter, had hit all of the local estimated receipt bottom line target of $11.25 million. So from a perspective as it relates to DOR, we would not have any revenue deficits in the general fund based on local estimated receipts because we've already hit that bottom line total $11.2 million. I don't expect any negative impact in terms of state aid. There's been no discussion of any 9C cuts, and I've had at least 2 discussions or interactions with DOR, and they don't anticipate any 9C cuts, which would impact state aid for the remainder of fiscal 20. So the $3.88 million that was on the cherry sheet, we fully expect to receive. I believe probably in fiscal 20, where some of the largest impacts are going to be, some of them will impact how we move forward into fiscal 21. As everybody's aware, at the April 8th Select Board meeting, they voted to extend the tax deadline from May 1st to June 1st. I think that from a revenue perspective, most likely our biggest impact is going to be in tax receipts, and it would basically be more of a timing issue than an actual impact. DOR does not look at a lack of collecting your tax commitments as a revenue deficit because they know that there's ways for the town to eventually always collect the money. So I think the biggest concern that we had was, could we hit the $11.2 million local estimated receipt number that we had projected on the recap sheet for fiscal 20 as part of the budget process? And we have already hit that. So I think from a revenue perspective, what we're going to be really dealing with is more of a timing issue on payment of property taxes as we try to figure out when we can start to let people go back to work and what that looks like. I think we probably will be facing about a 10 to 20% increase in the account receivable. So we're probably looking at, anywhere from upwards of probably $3.5 million on the accounts receivable in terms of where we're going to end up at the end of fiscal 20 in property taxes. The main issue that would create for us, obviously, is more of a cash flow perspective moving into fiscal 21 in July, in particular, when we have the largest amount of payments going out. So I think that's realistically on the revenue side where we may have some issues with regard to the general fund. Expenditures, we're still on target. Anything that is COVID-19 related is being categorized and coded and is going to be put into its own special fund so that we can ask for reimbursement through FEMA and any other opportunities that we have. So I don't think that those expenses are going to have a material impact on the general fund expenditure side. Overall, I think we're going to be able to manage through, I won't say relatively easy, but we will be able to manage through and not, I don't believe, have significant or substantial issues in terms of the expenditure budget in the general fund. We may need to do a few small transfers to move in with departments in terms of expenses, but I don't envision a very large problem at this point based on everything that we've been looking at. I've been in contact with Mark Willett at Wannacomet and Sconset. He feels that they can move forward in 20 and that they'll be able to meet the majority of their revenue targets, and their expenses seem to be pretty steady right now. So I don't think that we're going to have much problem with the water company. Been looking at the enterprise funds, in particular being solid waste. We may have some issues in 20. While I don't think that they'll be substantially large, but given the stop work orders that have been in the stay-at-home advisories have essentially shut down non-essential businesses, we're probably going to see somewhere between a 10 to 15% decline in potentially in revenues over this next 3-month period, with not as much obviously being brought to potentially to the landfill. So we may see some collection issues there that we may have to cover, and I'll explain how we're going to potentially deal with all those as we move into the fiscal 21 portion of this discussion. But with less, the other thing that I'm keeping in mind as we do this with solid waste is if we have less revenue, it also means that there's less deliveries to the facility. So our expenses are probably going to have some type of offset as well. So I don't believe it will be a very dramatic problem at this point within the solid waste. OAH, we're reviewing. We have had a higher average daily census there, so the revenue has been up. Obviously, we're working very hard to make sure that the residents there are in a safe environment. So we certainly have had some increased costs, but anything that we can ask for reimbursement for will be put into this same COVID-19 fund, and we'll ask for reimbursement for it. So I think that it's potentially there could be an issue for 20, a gap that we have to close, but I don't believe that it'll be a large one from what I'm looking at right now. And we're looking at it on a warrant by warrant basis, and we're working to see if we can close POs through all of this as well. So I do think that we will be able to manage those. Sewer, David has done a really great job running his operation. So I think that he's in a good place and able to manage the expenses, and we have seen more people opening their houses, as we've seen across all forms of platforms of social media. There are people have come here. So we are seeing an increase in the usage and within the sewer department and in with the water company right now. So I think sewer is okay. Airport is probably the biggest wild card, and I think the one that is probably the biggest unknown for the town as a whole. I've had conversations with the finance manager, with the airport director. They are going to the airport commission with a preliminary fiscal 20 review, and they're certainly going to experience some revenue decreases over the next 3 months or 4 months as it may be. They are going to also within that, and also they'll experience some revenue or some expenditure, less expenditures in some categories. So I think that they will be able to offset and won't end up in a deficit position in fiscal 20 based on the initial pass that I've seen in talking to the finance manager there. I think that when we move into 21, obviously, I think that that's probably going to be a little bit of a larger area of concern for all of us, is probably what the outlook for 21 holds for the airport. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
That is everyone else. I'm not unmuting. Thanks, Brian. Thank you for that. I'm going to go one by one. George, any comments or questions for Brian? Okay. Next time, George, you have to unmute. Shaking your head, I got it, but you still have to unmute. Thank you. Chris?
Thank you.
No? Okay. Joe Grouse?
Brian, just could you talk a little bit? Yes, thank you. I'm sort of curious as to what you're thinking in terms of if the summer has a slow start, never starts. I don't know how you've been looking at, how does that affect the non-tax real estate tax revenues that the town plans for?
Well, it'll certainly. Am I? Yeah.
Oh, now we can see you.
I know. I finally found a spot that the light's better. I think that in terms of fiscal 21, if we want to head into there, we can, but I think we're projecting a decrease, Joe. And we're projecting right now as a basis about 30% in the 5 largest categories of rooms and local estimated receipts, excuse me. Those being rooms, meals, plumbing, wiring, and building permits. We're also still waiting for some additional guidance from DOR on how they're going to look at potential decreases in various local estimated receipts, what they're going to be looking for, how they're going to allow us to budget for it. But we're certainly, I would be naive to think that we're going to just rebound and be exactly where we were today. So we have projected, I can tell you that the initial projection is a $2 million shortfall in revenue. Between now and town meeting, it's certainly depending on how the economy, how we start to roll out the economy and how we start to roll out getting back to work and everything could certainly have an impact or could change that projection as we go. But we're starting at 30% right now. And in my discussions with town administration, I have identified what every additional 10% does on some of those categories. So if we need to adjust it, we have an idea of what it is right now.
And
Brian,
that's really fiscal 21, right? My bad, because fiscal 20 ends June 30, so.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, we'll go. Brian's got our next agenda item, Joe, is for Brian to take us through fiscal 21. So Stephen, any comments on fiscal 20?
No.
Thank you. Peter McKeecher, any comments fiscal 20?
No, mine are all towards 21. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill?
I just wanted to confirm, because I know it came up once before, but weren't building permits already way down for fiscal 20? Wasn't the revenue quite a bit lower?
No, I mean, if you look at where we were, it was pretty consistent in building permits as to where we were last year. Last year, we took in $1.1 million. We took in the fourth quarter, 300,000 in building permits alone. And right now we're at about 802 pending some other additional postings to revenue for March that have to be done. So I think if it was down, it may have been a small amount down, but it wouldn't be a material, what I would deem to be a material large amount down.
Okay. I thought it was down a bit, so I guess I got that wrong.
Thank you. Peter S., any comments on 20?
No, I'm just interested to see how much of Brian's 20 philosophy carries over into 21.
Thank you. Joanna, any comments about 20? She's shaking her head. No, she's good. Okay. Dawn or Libby, do either of you want to say anything about this, or shall we move over to the next item? Libby?
I don't know that I have anything to say about 20 other than we're in a good position because of the way Brian has been budgeting. And we're pretty lucky that we don't, fingers crossed, have to make any major adjustments during the current fiscal year, but it's definitely something we have to keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you.
Denise, I
Dawn,
have a
any-
question.
Joe, question?
Just a quick follow-up. In fiscal 20, have all the COVID-19 activities resulted in, sort of a reduction in town operating costs, or are there extra costs because of all the, video meetings and people not being able to go to, I don't know, dealing with things in a unusual way?
I can start that off and then maybe Brian can follow up. The town employees are continuing to be paid, so there's no savings there. That is the case across the state. We probably have first responders and others who are getting quite a bit in overtime related to COVID directly. There's probably a little bit of an increase with things like Zoom here. I wouldn't call that material though at all, although it's a little bit more. There's probably, there's things that are not happening, of course, that could potentially be considered a cost. There is, though, the potential to get reimbursed for some of this. And our emergency management coordinator is he is basically filling the forms out as we go every day, so that on whatever the day is that they allow you to start submitting your reimbursement request, we're going to be right in there. And we've got phone calls every day about a whole variety of things, including what towns are doing with their employees and their town services. So we're keeping an eye on all of that. But I don't think, Brian, I don't know. There's some PPE costs, of course. There's some stuff like that. I don't know that it's, I don't even know if we've added it up yet.
We certainly, I think, are definitely experiencing some increased costs, as the town manager indicated, in some categories. Obviously, our frontline responders overtime, be it police, fire, and even our island home. We're tracking all of these costs and we'll be identifying them and putting in for reimbursement. But I don't see a situation, given the fact that we were still running pretty well compared in a favorable position to budget, that it's going to create a strain that's going to require some large remedial action at a town meeting to manage. I think that we're in a fortunate position with the help of the department heads and how we manage the budget, that I think we can still absorb it. And then we obviously will ask for the reimbursement for those costs.
Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm curious if we've identified any social service gaps that don't have other sources of help from the state or federal government that we would look to fund through any kind of emergency funding, and if there's a mechanism for the select board to ask to do that.
Our Human Services Director, Taylor Hilst, has been very much on top of help and assistance and relief for businesses, individuals, and families. I'm sure a lot of people would want to have the town give them money, but what we've done so far is, rather than allocate anything extra, the contract review funds, the Health and Human Services funding allocation, instead of waiting to be released until the end of the year, has already been released for the rest of the fiscal year. So that might be a little bit of help. There are a number of relief efforts underway at state and federal levels that we're trying to get access to, not necessarily through the town, but to find out what it is and make it available and published on the town website. It looks a bit mixed from other towns as to whether or not they're establishing funds. The Community Foundation, I'm not totally, people probably know more about this than me. There's funds that have been made available for, I think, individual, family, and small business relief, I think. So there are local community funds that are being made available. I don't know if that totally answers that question. Do you know of anything else, Brian? Or maybe Dawn? I don't know if you know.
I don't know of anything else, but I saw one town that had established, but it was, I mean, in comparison to what Nantucket's needs are going to be, it was relatively small. I think it was 150,000 in town aid to small businesses that they could apply for. But I mean, one thing that's been kind of floated out there in the community is stuff that we've already appropriated large sums for. I mean, the big thing that's getting hit up is the $20 million for affordable housing, and whether we want to at some point consider whether we want to reappropriate anything with a town meeting vote, obviously, towards economic relief for small businesses and community members.
So I think there are a lot of great private philanthropic efforts out there, and that's great, but philanthropy can only do so much, even here where we have such great philanthropy. And I just wonder whether we need to, and this is probably more of a selectman issue, so I don't want to take us afield, but whether there are things peculiar to Nantucket that would fall through the cracks that state and federal money wouldn't identify because of the peculiarities of this place. And, you know, if we can identify those, and I'm sure we would hear from the select board about that. I think there's a mechanism for that where it comes to the FinCom and funds can be allocated if the select board were to ask for it.
Thank you, Chris. Jill?
I was just going to underscore, because Chris, you know, we're working with the hospital on that grant through HHS. And even though that money is not COVID money, because we are unique, we do think we have a good chance of getting that money, and it's about $1 million. So we're not going to know that for another probably 6 to 8 weeks, but it's real money and it would be released right away. So, you know, it's all hands on deck to get that grant written and supported, and many of us are working on it. So, and that's around opioid addiction, but again, it's all social services.
Yeah, and I know that the Community Foundation and Remain, they've been already allocating to like a safe place and Small Friends and many of the people who apply through the CRC. They have been getting additional money. I think that last I heard, I think in total there's been $1 million. To Chris's point that, you know, people are quite generous in making donations and trying to help out, but with the scope and scale of this, you know, $1 million will not go probably far enough. So. Okay, any other questions for Brian before we turn over to the next agenda point, which is the outlook for 2021? I'm not going to read the whole thing, Brian. I'll let you just, as we are expecting it to be in 2021.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So starting with the general fund, as I noted, we started at a 30% reduction in the five, what we consider the five largest or key points in local estimated receipts. It projects to be about a $2 million deficit as a starting point. Again, as I said, some of this is dependent on additional guidance that we receive from DOR on how to handle some things in terms of budgeting for local estimated receipts, but that's where we're starting. And that's the discussions points that I've had with the town administration was $2 million. We did send out the list from Article 10 to everyone of all the items that are funded by free cash in Article 10 for the annual town meeting. I've had a discussion with Mark at the water company. We're going to have a follow-up discussion next week. I have a discussion, or I'm trying to set up a discussion with David to kind of get an idea of, in conjunction with water company, what those changes might be. There's certainly going to be some, but I think that we can manage them. Our island home is, I guess the best way to say it is it's our island home right now. It's, there's certainly going to be some challenges that we're going to potentially face there with the way we had planned on doing things at the annual town meeting. The good thing for us relative to island home is with a higher average daily census than we had when we were started, we may be able to project a little bit more patient revenue, but we also have to be very, very careful when we do that too, that we don't, because as easy as it goes up, it can go down just as fast. So we certainly want to strike a good balance there. The airport, I know they're working on it, and I can tell you that it certainly is more than likely going to be some type of an issue, and it could potentially, I don't want to say that it will, but it's possible that it will require some discussions in the town about whether we have the capacity or the resources to be able to help in any way, given the challenges that they're certainly going to face in terms of air travel and air service to the facility. So the reason that we had given you Article 10 is because the proposal or the suggestion that I have made to town administration is that on a temporary basis for fiscal 21, that we eliminate all free cash spending on capital projects. In Article 10, that would generate $5.953 million that we would have available to consider how to use it to potentially as a backstop to any of the issues that we may face as we continue to look through this and as we continue to progress through it. We could use it at an annual town meeting to allocate if we had any issues in an enterprise fund. The most one that I'm most likely concerned about, as I mentioned before, is solid waste. So if we needed to close any gaps, we would have that potential $5.9 million available to cover some of those anticipated gaps in the operating budget potentially this year. We can also use it potentially to fund the potential or projected deficit in the general fund if we believe on a one-year basis that this eventually is going to turn itself around. It would be available to help in fiscal 21 operations, be it our island home, be it solid waste again, or be it if the airport were to need anything and we had the available ability to provide any additional support based on what their projections are. I have talked to Cinder at Hilltop Securities on, did we think that our bond rating would be impacted by directing this? And I will tell you that in our financial policies, one of the things that we've highlighted to both S&P and to Moody's is the fact that if we were ever to enter into a catastrophic event, one of the first options that we could look to would be to redeploy our free cash and reserves as a backstop as we manage through so that our operations were not severely degraded. So on that basis, we don't believe that the rating agencies would look unfavorably on this on this method to manage through the crisis that we're dealing with. And that was a concern as I started this. We certainly think that, I think that it's one solution or one discussion point that we've had based on where we project it to be. We certainly wanted to bring the discussion to the FinCom as we work through this and ultimately to the board on what we see happening and where this goes. But that's why Article 10 was included, because the first recommendation was to look potentially at eliminating the spending on capital from free cash. I will tell you that we've had discussions with all the departments, the largest being DPW, IT, and the school. They're all in the process of prioritizing all of the projects. They're on board with this discussion that we've had with them. They are prioritizing them so that in the event that it isn't 5.9 isn't needed to manage through fiscal 21, based on that prioritization, there may be an opportunity could be an opportunity to add back or do some of those projects based on free cash. One of the other things that we're finalizing is any unexpended balances in currently approved projects that have been completed may be an area that we would be able to direct the remaining appropriation through a reappropriation into some of those projects that are on that list, depending on what that ultimate number looks at. So it's the easiest way to do this would be to eliminate free cash and then reappropriate from other funding sources into any capital projects that we think might be able to continue if we have that funding available. So that's kind of the basis for the starting point of the discussion.
There we go. I'm just as bad at unmuting as everybody. Thank you, Brian. Let's go one by one. George? Any questions or comments? George? Is everybody frozen?
No, I just had the
Okay.
wrong clicker. Brian, the only thing I'm curious about, I guess, is are there any potential areas where the levies can be increased to perhaps ease the funding shortfalls? That's just in general.
Unfortunately, I appear to be as bad about unmuting as well. So in terms of, I mean, if you're talking about an enterprise fund, we certainly could consider raising the user charges. I don't know that we necessarily, given the crisis that we're in, necessarily want to be, that may not be the most viable option, but with the enterprise funds, we certainly could look to user charges or user fees and potentially make changes to those structures. In the general fund, you know, you basically have three real sources of revenue in the general fund. You have the tax levy, local estimated receipts, and state aid. State aid, admittedly, is probably one of the things that I think the school, when we look at it, is most concerned about, because, you know, we're not entirely sure what the legislature is going to do at this point. And that's still up in the air. The House was supposed to release their budget relatively soon, and I'm not sure that they're even going to get that done quite yet. But the likelihood of really being able to project past the $11.2 million that we had next year, even conservatively, is unlikely. That's probably going to have to be lower, which is where the $2 million number comes into play. Right. I will note, as a point of discussion, I did tell Capcom this year, when we were looking at how to calculate the reduction, I took the 2006 last completed year that we had at that point in time, and looked at rooms tax then, and looked at it in 2010, when most people would think that we kind of had started to move out of the 2008 financial crisis. Mm-hmm. And it was about a 28.5% drop in rooms tax revenue in the period of ending in 2006 to the 2010 period. So right. That was kind of the basis of how I got there. And, you know, I've had initial very preliminary reach outs to a couple of colleagues on the Cape to try to get what their thinking is, but we did look at a lot of, you know, we looked internally at some of our numbers to try to figure out as the best point to start at. But then the only other option, George, bring this back to answer your question, is the only other option in the general fund would be to raise the tax levy, which would require an override question. And we do have a $5 million question on the ballot right now, which I guess the status of whether that will pass or not is probably very much up in the air at this point.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions, George?
No. Okay.
Chris, and by the way, I'm calling you in the order I physically see you on my screen. So in case anybody's wondering why my order is what it is. Chris, you're top right corner for me.
Great. Nothing further at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe? Nothing?
I'm good. No, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Stephen?
Brian, you may have just given this answer, but can you explain what the baseline is for your occupancy excise tax, given that we had a full year with the short-term rentals being included.
So the baseline of the 30%, if you're asking, in the budget for next year, we had projected $4 million. I will tell everyone that through the third quarter, we collected a little over, probably just close to 5.1, just 5.2 million. But we had projected, as we had mentioned with the select board in the presentation, we had projected $4 million because there had been discussions about what to do with the money above that number. So we had conservatively projected, $4 million in the general fund. So that 30% brings us down to a projection of the baseline of where we would be in the budget of $2.8 million for next year.
2.8 million for next year, and
Yeah.
through the third quarter, we had received how much?
Just under 5.2 million. And I'm projecting nothing in the fourth quarter of fiscal 20 because most lodging establishments and Airbnbs are not able to have any rentals right now. So the likelihood of collecting anything on June 30th is not very high.
Not very high, but I wouldn't imagine that this quarter is anything close to an actual quarter of the receipts in a year, just given the time of the year.
No, I mean, the last year, the fourth quarter of fiscal 19 was about $128,000 which is for March, April, and May. So, and the reason that I'm projecting zero is because April and May have have relatively large functions and events that we all know have been canceled. So I think that if we get anything, it'll be de minimis at best for this quarter.
Okay, so then if we look at the 2020 actuals, and then we take out an entire, I guess we're not taking out an entire quarter in 21, but we look at 30% of actuals from 20, even assuming we get nothing in this fourth quarter. How does that number compare to
well, at 5 million, you'd be talking about $1.5 million. So it'd be about $700,000 difference, roughly thereabouts. But again, since the general fund budget only had $4 million in it, because there have been other groups or efforts to secure some of that funding for other things, potentially for future uses, we only put $4 million in. We did not. Conceptually, I could have put all $5 million in the budget if I had wanted to make that recommendation. But given the fact that there's other groups out there during the budget process that have been wanting to access that money, or other board initiatives that may want to in the future direct some of that money into stabilization funds for certain purposes, we put $4 million in the budget, which is roughly what we've been operating on an annual basis thereabouts. I mean, it was increased a little bit from this year's budget to fiscal 21 to get to that 4 million, but that's relatively where we've been on an annualized basis already.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Peter M.
Couple questions, if I may. Brian, with the accounts receivable pertaining to the property tax, you said 10 to 20%. What's the magnitude of that dollar-wise? 15 million, give or take?
Oh, no, not even that. It's probably about $1.5 million.
Is representative?
Yeah, of an increase on top of what we normally have. Normally, we collect anywhere between 95 to 100% of the levy before June 30th. So we're looking at probably collecting between 85 and 90% roughly. So that probably equates to about another $1.5 million in accounts receivable that wouldn't be revenue on the books in fiscal 20.
Okay. So the fact that the remedial action against collecting people who can't pay their property taxes longer term, there's probably no real concern with that small amount of money then.
There's always a concern because I think that, how the state and the federal government decide to roll out getting back to work is probably going to play a large part in the how quickly we start to recoup that to be, and it could be that we face somewhat of a similar or maybe a smaller set of increase in receivables in the first quarter of fiscal 21. So I think that it's conceptually, I think that we will probably most likely recoup most of the fiscal 20 levy by the end of the first quarter, depending on the rollout.
Okay.
of how fast people are able to get back to work, and presuming that we don't have another stay-at-home order because of some type of resurgence or a rebound.
So the next question kind of focuses around human resources and employment. Obviously, I think it's fair to say most privatized companies have either, furloughed, laid off, pink slipped a lot of their staff members. When does it come time relevant to the public, the town budget, will our employees, if at all, ever be affected? When would we make cutbacks on staffing models? When would that take place? If it were to take place?
I think this is more a question for the town manager than myself, but I will say that obviously one of the first things that we did was identify solutions that would not severely degrade the services within the town, i.e. the free cash. But I think that I will let the town manager speak from there.
Thanks, Brian. So I think obviously we didn't expect this to be going on as long as it has. And as I said before, we are keeping track as best we can on what other towns are doing. There are a number of forums that people log into every day with questions and comments and information. And as far as we can tell, no town has stopped paying their employees for not working. We have talked about layoffs. We have talked about furloughs. Furloughs are more of a thing that are done when you're trying to reach a certain dollar amount or a certain threshold of costs that you need to recoup in some way. And whether furlough or a layoff, it all requires collective bargaining, and it takes a while. And in layoff situations, for example, and most of the employees, as you all know, are in a union, layoffs would require the payment of any outstanding accrued benefit time. It may require some payment, depending on what the union is, of other benefits for a period of time. And I guess what we're really hoping is that we will be able to get back to work when the governor lifts the stay-at-home order. Hopefully that will be by May 4th. We do have a number of employees who are working remotely. Obviously the public safety group is all at work. Some airport employees are at work, water's at work, sewer's at work. Several town admin people are at work, and there are sprinkled about different employees who are working from home. Town admin is working with all the departments on a kind of a get back to work plan, phased in with safety protocols and social distancing and all of that stuff needing to be in place. Even if we get back to work, say the stay-at-home order was lifted tomorrow, we're still going to need a little bit of time to get those safety measures into place. DPW is going to need to do some physical retrofitting at the various buildings to maintain social distances with the public. So at this point, I would say we don't have a specific plan for layoffs or furloughs. We do have an executive session scheduled for next week with the Select Board, Water Commission, Airport, and School Committee to discuss the bargaining negotiations that we had started in anticipation for contracts that are expiring June 30th, 2020. And we have a couple of different approaches sort of laid out for those negotiations. So I'd rather not reveal that at a public meeting, but there are some things under discussion at those levels. But we've gotten a few inquiries about when are the town employees all going to be laid off or let go. And we don't have a plan for that right at the moment.
So kind of a follow-up, thank you, Libby. A follow-up question, Libby, would be proactively, how have we as a community, or how is the employer, the town, reached out to its employees? Have you kept them all up to speed on what's happening?
Yep, we do. The HR director's been doing a daily video with them. It started out as a daily phone call. Now it's turned into a video, and we are giving them information. There are emails to them. There's a number of, employee assistance types of things that's been made available. I would say they're pretty well communicated with.
And one more question, I'm sorry, Brian, back to you. A question about pending legislation up in Boston. Are there a few, many, none potential bills that would help the town of Nantucket in any of its financial woes or programs?
Well, I think that the one that was the most help was the one to be able to extend the bill deadline and the waiver of interest. I think there's other pending bills. I know that I was doing some research on the CARES Act because there was $150 billion allocated to cities and towns. And unfortunately, when you go in and actually read the fine print, you have to have a population of over $500,000 in this first round, or 500,000 people, excuse me, not dollars, which we clearly don't have. So I don't think we're going to leverage much money from that. I think that where we're going to get the most help right now, I don't know of a lot of other bills other than to address, things procedurally on how things are done right now in terms of finances. But I think that where we're going to get the most help is by submitting all of these costs to FEMA and getting reimbursed at the percentage level. And I do want to caution everybody, if we could submit them tomorrow, it would probably take, I think the last FEMA submission that I saw came in was from costs submitted about 5 years ago for a storm. So these are not going to come back immediately to the town. There's going to be a length of time before we get it. So it's certainly, but other than that, I'm not aware of a lot of other programs that are going to actually be benefit to us at this point. It doesn't mean that in the next round of stimulus or the state isn't working on something that may help us ultimately. The best way they could help us, quite frankly, would be not cut the local aid.
Just to add a tiny bit to what Brian is saying, so that you know some of the other approaches that we're talking about. We're talking about sort of like, if this, then that. If we reach this point, then what would we do? If it's a little further, then what would we do? Not every, we're not going to work up 100 scenarios, but we're working up a few. And they would include things like, do we hire seasonal employees later and have less programs during the summer? Do we delay things like the fireworks? Do we see what programs are out there that we would reduce or sort of temporarily lay off the program in some manner? Are there projects that we would defer or delay or reduce? There probably are going to be some items that were in the fiscal 21 budget that we would do one of those things with, or one or more of those things, in order to make ourselves operational. The primary goal is to get back to sort of normal operations as quickly as possible. There may be new initiatives that we delay going into summer. We talked about some of those this morning at Capcom meeting. Just looking through my notes of other stuff we've talked about. We're not going to have a normal summer, and there may be other revenue sources that are reduced. Of the local receipts that Brian was talking about, I'm sure that it's only a matter of time before restaurants want to reduce their liquor license fees, or waive them entirely, or even other sorts of town fees. Liquor licenses aren't, the revenue source of the town, but they do contribute to the local receipts that come in. So it's something of an issue. Beach stickers are probably going to be down. All sorts of little user things like that are probably going to be down. Do we reduce lifeguards? Do we reduce community service officers? We have all of that stuff under discussion right now. We have activities that need to get going, like everybody else right now, in order to get ahead of the summer, and we're not doing them right now. It's going to take some time to ramp this back up. We have a discussion with Rob right after this meeting to talk about what public works activities can get restarted, and what PPE and social distancing and all those sorts of measures are going to have to be put into place in order for that to happen. So there's a lot to think about with regard to town operations, but we're very mindful of the fact that the town employees are still getting paid. The bulk of them are not working, and there are union and other federal requirements that keep them at that status level.
Thank you, Libby. Anything else, Peter M? No? Okay, Peter S, over to you.
Just a couple of things. Stephen, is Stephen still there?
Yes, he is.
Okay, because he's disappeared from my screen.
He turned into an S, but he's back.
Okay. Stephen, what is the consensus right now among the realtors in terms of the decrease that it looks like, or the cancellations we're going to have for summer rentals?
I struggle with the concept that there's any consensus in my industry at all. So,
Okay,
so,
how about your opinion?
yeah, I will say that there seems to be a common approach from all of the real estate brokerages whose principals I've spoken with, and that is that cancellation policies and leases are being upheld, subject to any governmental restrictions on travel to Nantucket or restrictions against short-term rentals. And as we all know, there aren't any restrictions on getting to the island, but there is a restriction against short-term rentals that lasts until May 4th. Common wisdom is that order will probably be extended, but the hope is that it won't be extended much beyond May 4th, certainly not into July and August, which is the vast majority of the rentals that certainly my office has booked, and I'm sure that's the same for everyone else. So, with that in mind, we're not projecting that a lot of cancellations will take place, but we were expecting about 30% of our rentals to be done between March 1st and the summer season. And there haven't been any, I shouldn't say there haven't been any, but there's been a very small number of new bookings for the summer. We haven't been doing any bookings for leases that begin anything before June 1st, and I'm not even sure we've done any that early. But we haven't had the number of new leases come in since early March that we would have otherwise expected. So even without the cancellations, we're seeing a decline in the total number of bookings. Now, we get inquiries every day. In fact, we're getting more inquiries since March 15th than we did in the same period last year. So there's some pent-up demand. I think if people feel comfortable that they'll be able to come and enjoy Nantucket, whatever that means, to the individual, then we will see people booking closer to their stay than they usually do.
Okay. Libby? Is Libby still on?
Yep.
Is there any sort of point of view from the Chamber of Commerce in terms of retail with all the empty stores in town, et cetera?
I'm sure there is. I'm not exactly sure what their point of view is, but the town has put together a something of an economic impact work group that has representatives of the chamber on it, a couple of board members and some other people from different sectors. And today we had a little bit of email exchange about making that a bigger, more solid group that actually will have perhaps a member or two from the finance committee and other town agencies, as well as private groups, to look at what the plan could be for getting the economy back on track. So I would expect the board will probably, Don might want to mention this, but there probably will be some board discussion about that. So far, I don't think they've floated any tremendously new ideas just yet. I think they're more focused right at the moment on relief measures for businesses and where people can access them and where they can get information about them, that kind of thing. I think also the outlook again is probably, I hear people say in the paper last week, or a week before, there were some articles, it's not going to be a summer that is normal at all. It's going to be down most likely. There may be businesses that don't operate, and how do we get them back going? And events are going to be way down. A lot of them are canceled. So how do we salvage something is kind of an ongoing discussion right now. As also we're getting some amount of questions about what will the measures be for when people are coming back? Will we have to quarantine them? What will the rules be for turnovers at hotels, motels, guest houses, things like that? We don't know the answers to almost all of that. We will be relying on state guidance to tell us what is the distancing going to be in restaurants. What will the cleaning requirements be for hotels and motels? That's not stuff that is likely to come from the town. It is likely to come from the state for all towns. So it's very much of a wait and see and look for the information and try to get the information and have some discussions amongst ourselves to sort of try to formulate something of a plan. Don might have a little bit more to say about that stuff.
Oh, I mean, I think that that sums it up pretty well. I would say that we're very much in a waiting pattern to see what's coming down from the state on guidelines for that. I don't think that we should go any further with trying to reinvent the wheel on our end. And the governor's got a lot broader, like very large hotels and Airbnbs and so forth throughout Boston to figure out how to regulate that I'm sure will be very applicable to the smaller operations that we have going here. And in terms of, we were just batting around a very pretty early email earlier today about expanding this kind of economic impact task force and including at least one member from the finance committee. So I don't know if we'll probably put that on next week's agenda, I think at this stage. We're talking about having a second meeting next week because our meetings have been 100% taken up with COVID discussion to spread things out a little bit. But I'm not sure what else I have to add.
Thanks, Dawn. Peter S., anything else?
No, that's good. Thank
Jill?
you.
Hi, I really just had a bigger question for Libby or Dawn. Has the governor talked about, or locally has the Board of Health, maybe I've missed this, talked about the beaches being closed? Because it seems to me that might help Brian to, plan if fiscal 21, the first quarter in particular. I mean, if those things are closed, then I don't see anyone coming out here. And so I don't think 28.5% is enough. And I just wondered if there'd been any talk about that.
Go ahead, Don.
Oh, I mean, or you can go. I mean, all internal discussion that I'm aware of, the closing the beaches is kind of the last thing that any of us want to see happen. The state, I believe, closed some large state beach parking lots because it became a problem. I hope we're heading in the direction that things at the state level are going to level and will, before the high season hits, that won't be as much of an issue as long as people are really used to their social distancing guidelines, which I think that is becoming more ingrained in just people's everyday behavior. But I would hope that we don't have to project anything that sort of makes things worse here than they are right now in terms of restrictions. But I don't know, Libby, do you agree with that?
Yes, I ditto what she said.
Jill, anything else?
No, that's the main one. I feel like that's the big driver for the summer people. So that's obviously our biggest ticket is the first quarter.
Absolutely. Good. I would strongly encourage everyone on FinCom, if you probably already do, but I definitely watch both the Select Board and the Board of Health meetings online. When they are, I mean, obviously there's Wednesday night, but I find them to be very helpful in understanding a lot of the issues that are going on. So it's, compelling TV, as you can imagine. It's kind of like this meeting. So, and with that, is there any other questions? Brian, is there anything else you want to add in last? And Libby, because I'm conscious of time. It's 3:00. I'm guessing you guys have other things you have to be at.
One quick thing about town meeting. As you all know, it's been rescheduled right now till Saturday, May 30th. And that is probably going to be another upcoming discussion that the board has. Is that realistic? Given that by that time, we're not so sure how comfortable people will be with social distancing, and we don't really know about the stay-at-home order. We've talked about a couple of different things. Should we keep having the moderator keep doing her 30-day extension until maybe we get into the fall and then just basically have the annual town meeting in the fall? Or should we think about having it a bit later, maybe into June, and try to reduce the number of articles on the warrant by take some voluntary compliance with citizens perhaps. But the town sponsored articles, you know, if they're not directly related to operations that have to happen right now, maybe those could be put off. So that's going to be an ongoing discussion with the board, probably, I think maybe at its meeting next week, the 21st, or even the week after, maybe both. So that's definitely something to pay attention to, because if we do have town meeting within the next 2 months, I think we are going to need some budget amendments, which is going to require some revising of the motions.
Thank you, Libby. Okay, any other, I'm going to do one last quick round. So George, anything else? Nope. Chris, anything else?
Thank you.
Jill, anything
Oh,
else?
yes, one more thing just about what Libby just said. When are you going to decide about the town meeting schedule?
Well, right now, it's rescheduled to Saturday, May 30th.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to wait and see in the next couple of weeks what happens with the stay-at-home order. So it's a bit of a wait and see.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, anything else?
I'm good.
Peter M,
All set, thank you.
Peter S,
Nothing, thank you.
Stephen?
All set, thanks.
Okay. So Brian and Ally, as always, thank you for the great preparation and thank you for the thoughtful discussion. It was very helpful. And can I get a motion to adjourn, Stephen?
Motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second, Peter M?
Second,
I have to roll call. George? All in favor? George? You have to say aye, George.
Aye.
There we go. Chris?
Aye.
Jill?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Peter? M?
aye.
Peter S?
Aye.
Stephen?
Aye.
Denise, aye. Okay, with that, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Dawn, for being here, and Libby and Ally and Brian. And as always, when we need to have a meeting, then we'll get one scheduled like this time. So Brian, thanks again for the preparation and for all the information today. And very nice to see everyone that I haven't run into in Stop and Shop from 6 feet away.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.